Akavi Mamalalo tells us that if you consider three things and you're cognizant of them, of course, you have to have certain fundamental beliefs. You'll never sin. From where do you come? Where are you going? And before who you will ultimately give reckoning. From where do you come from? From a droplet of semen. Where are you going? To a location where there are worms and maggots. And before who will we give reckoning? Before God, the King of Kings. And if you consider these three things and you're cognizant of them, you'll never come to sin. We always discussed this in the past. What is the basis for a person to get off the straight and narrow path? We feel that we have entitlement. We've done enough. We're deserving. We deserve that respite. We deserve that extra bonus. And even God owes it to us because we've done so much. Even though most times or never does a person have any entitlement when it comes to God. We've overextended our expense account endless times that if we would continuously contribute forever, we're always way behind. With debtors beyond the capacity to repay debt. The Midrash tells us that a person has a child, a male child, there's a mitzvah to circumcise the child. And you do the mitzvah of circumcision, which is considered a very special mitzvah. On the 8th day, God says, and if I wouldn't have given you that child, would you have a child to circumcise? Every aspect of our lives, the Avos Avos writes that if a person would start just analyzing his function at every level, there is no way to express our gratitude and our debts to God. If a person would be born without memory, the brain did not have a retention component, you realize you cannot function, not for a moment. You cannot speak. You cannot absorb anything. If I tried to teach you how to pronounce a sound, the next moment, after I've taught it to you, if you don't retain that, what's the next step? The previous moment didn't exist. So every moment that we're able to retain or to learn, to grow, and to have takeaways from anything, it's all based on memory. That's just the retention component of the brain. What about the function of the brain? What it provides? Every function within the neurological system is the brain. You know, I was reading about 2 years ago, I was reading this article that the level of ingenious in the way that God created the human being, and I'm not sure if they teach this in veterinarian school. Do you know there are senses in the mouth that the moment you put anything in your mouth, if it's, let's say, a carbohydrate, if it's a protein, whatever it may be, the moment the sensors detect that goes into your mouth and the saliva, there's an immediate message sent to the brain that certain secretions have to be produced by the body to break down that food, whether it's a carbohydrate, and exactly how the systems have to be immediately put into play. Not to be believed. The tongue, taste buds, the salivary glands, the teeth. Person would not have teeth to chew. do you realize the digestive system is not sufficient to break down the food, to be a beneficiary of the foods we take in, the intake of those foods. It's only after we've chewed it, and we've broken it down, we've crushed it, does the body have the ability now to take the next step with the acids to be able to break down the foods to be a beneficiary of whatever that is. The waste system in the body that separates the good from the bad and the toxins and the liver. I mean, everything. It's not to be believed. I'm not even talking about the genius. You have to be a doctor, a scientist to appreciate. It's genius beyond anything to even to relate to. So how thankful do we have to be to God? So you say to God, you know something? You didn't have to create me. I'm doing you a favor. Later we read in Pirkei Avos, you say to a person, it's against your will you're born. It's against your will you live. It's against your will you die. You tell me who wants to die. Most people, as much as their predicaments, the experience they've experienced in life, nobody wants to leave this existence. Most people want to remain, despite everything. But yet we feel entitled. And if you feel entitled, you're off base. You're seeing through a jaundiced lens. Humility is key. So how does one somehow tone down the ego and deflate the ego? From where do you come? Where are you going? Person works out in the gym. Specimen of health. Only eats the most expensive foods. Invests his whole life only satisfying his desires. Won't you realize tomorrow you know where you're going to be? I'm in a trash heap. Many years ago, I had a discussion with our favorite professed atheist. So I said to him, you mean to say, if you don't believe in God, do you believe you have a soul? He says, I don't believe I have a soul. I said, do you believe you're an intellectual animal? He says, yeah, maybe. I said, you mean when the dog dies and you die, you're both going into the same trash heap? Just as the dog has no soul, and just throw him into the trash heap and he just decomposes, and you forget about him, you're no different. Is that what you're telling me? He didn't respond so quick. Years ago, there was somebody, he was a con person. He was selling plots in a cemetery in Florida for dogs, for canines. Plus, he had special tombstones made. At the end of the day, they found out he had dug a pit there somewhere, and he would have all the remains of these dogs thrown into this pit, covered up, and that was the canine cemetery. And he had a special monument maker. The monument was for the person who sent the money. You know, people, they delude themselves. You can live in a state of denial. But who lives in a state of denial? The person who doesn't want to recognize that he's not who he thinks he really is, and he doesn't want to know who he is. What do you think most people, they can't tolerate a quiet night? Person, what are you doing tonight? Oh, we're going out. Most people live their lives of distraction. Because if they wouldn't be distracted, they stop and they look themselves in the mirror and start reflecting exactly on who they are, what their value is. They'd have very serious situations. But if you have humility and you believe you have a purpose and a value and you're there to give, rather than write your own script, what do you have such difficulty? confronting truth, because people don't want to know truth. They want to believe what they want to believe. So humility is key to set you on that straight, narrow path. From where do you come? Where are you going? Before who will you give a reckoning? So over here, there's a beautiful word from Rabbi Yoda, who's the commentary, one of the commentators on Pirkei Avos. We discussed the whole concept of forgetting. Forgetting is what is part of the human faculty. People forget. We have things clearly, then we grasp things, but over time, things start fading out. And he explains, a person does something which is totally unconscionable. The shame is totally overwhelming. But over time, a person can live with it, and other people begin forgetting. Initially, you feel like digging a hole and disappearing. But you let some time pass, you're able to survive it. And over time, eventually, it's reached a point, it's not comparable to the first moment. You forget. So shame is part of the human reality, but over time, as in the physical realm, what is, what was, is, and what is will not be. There's past, present, and future. In the spiritual, there's no such thing as time. Everything's that one moment. The moment was, is, and the moment that is will be. So could you imagine you do something, you had an opportunity, and the opportunity made a difference in your life, and you chose to pass on it due to some foolishness. And then afterwards, you realize the opportunity you missed. You say it's not the end of the world. As we say, time heals. In the spiritual realm, there's no such thing as time heals, because time stops. So if you violate something or do something wrong, let's talk about the negative, and you're going to be confronted with your life's record by God, and you stand before God, the word shame, or the concept of shame, is really a physical concept. We can't relate to it. What shame in the spiritual realm is, that shame is going to be a constant. On the most extreme level of shame, whatever shame is in the spiritual realm, you can experience that for eternity. If you had an opportunity, that you passed on the opportunity, and you will never have that opportunity present itself again. The pain of losing and missing an opportunity is not only for the moment, it's for then and for always, for eternity. So if you take into account before who you will give a reckoning, experiencing that shame before God in the spiritual realm, that shame will be then and for always, which we can't even relate to within the context of being a human being. Of course, time passes, as we said, time heals. There's a famous word from the Rabbi Lutzato, Ramchal, in the Path of the Just, and he explains that if a person would be cognizant and understand the ramifications of sin, understanding how one is victimizing himself, to the degree that you're victimizing yourself, you would never sin. So what is the strategy of the evil inclination? It's called distraction. He overwhelms you with distraction, and because he's distracted, you can't focus and stop to make that evaluation. You cross that line. And he says, where do we find this? We find that when Moshe Rabbeinu came to Egypt and he presented his credentials that he's the Redeemer, what was there immediately? There was a work stoppage. The Jews, the financial backbone of Egypt, came to a halt. The Jews said, we're not working any longer. We're not producing the quotas. What do? How do you get people back to work? What does Paro do? Pharaoh, the Egyptian monarch, gives the order. Until now, the government used to contribute straw as one of the ingredients in making bricks. From now on, we don't supply straw any longer. And the taskmasters who demanded those quotas will demand the quotas even though the Jews have to gather their own straw. But you realize it's nearly an impossible task. To meet the quotas and gather the straw, that means you don't have a moment to think, a moment to breathe. You have no moment for yourself. What happens? The leaders, the Jews, go complain to Paro. And he says, what are you trying? You're going to destroy us. It's an impossibility. How do you expect us to produce those quotas if you don't supply the straw? We have to gather straw ourselves. We can never make the quota. So Paro says to them, don't you realize that the only reason why you're complaining is because you have too much time to think? You're a bunch of lazy people. Because if you'd be fully involved, you would have come up with these baseless complaints. Now that you have this overwhelming task to produce the quotas, if not, you're going to be beaten to death. I'm not going to hear any complaints any longer. You have too much time to think. So the Ramchal writes in the Path of the Just, the strategy of the evil inclination is also have too much time to think. Always distractions. What are we eating for breakfast? What are we doing tonight? Where are we going? I feel offended. I have my insight. I have what I think. There's always what. I have a mortgage to pay. I got to make a telephone call. Whatever it is. Whatever you want to do, anything positive, as much as you want to focus, there's always some level of distraction. And that distraction does not allow you to appreciate the value of the positive and the negative of the negative. And that's what we have to contend with all our lives. Despite distractions. I'll give you an example. There's a work that was written in the time of the Vilna Gaon by somebody by the name of Alexander Ziskind. He was a very holy man. And it's a work that's written based on the Zohar, the understanding of and significance of tefillah, prayer, weekday prayer, Shabbos prayer, Yom Tov prayer, holiday prayer. And he writes over there that before he would say Birchas Hamosach, before he would say grace after meals, which is a Torah obligation, he would say a tefillah. He would pray to God that when he's going to begin to say the Birchas Hamosach, the benching, he should not have any distractions. That he should be able, from the moment he starts till he ends, no distractions. That he should be able to fully focus and express his appreciation to God for the meal that he'd eaten, for a stated state. Everybody experiences this. You know, Motzoi Shabbos, when Shabbos is over, there's a rabbinic law, one has to say Havdalah. We say take a cup of wine, and we say Havdalah on a cup of wine. And we have summon, we have spices, we have a candle. And everybody's sitting here, Havdalah. The moment you start saying Havdalah, you know what happens? The phone rings. First thing. So right away, everybody's distracted. Are you going to answer it? Not going to answer it? Of course, you're not going to answer it. If you know the law, you don't interrupt. But what do? You rush through Havdalah. Maybe an important phone call. If it's not an important phone call, you have caller ID. You wish it stops ringing. Never fails. You want to do something. You have an inspiration to study. And you want to sit and study. Then all of a sudden, your wife says, could you please come in here? I want to ask you something. The moment you're asked that question, you take that break, the wind has been taken out of your sails. That's the way it is always. Whenever you have an inspiration, any level of distraction, immediately you go back to almost to ground zero. It's no longer the same. As they say, this expression in English, when the iron is hot, strike. That's the way it is. Once it cools down, it's not longer the same. You know, the blacksmith, he has to put the iron back into the fire to get it red hot, then he starts pounding it. The moment it cools down, when he hits it with that sledgehammer to shape it into something, it doesn't shape the same way. We're no different. But this is all the machinations of the evil inclination. Of course, some people say, I'm no fool. It may not be ego, but distraction is distraction. And therefore we have to pray. So when we say God created the evil inclination and he created Torah as its antidote, what does the Torah do? When you study Torah, it gives you merit that God keeps the evil inclination. When one goes on, there's people, they spend a fortune going on these trips to Africa, safaris. You got to wear special goggles because with the wind, you get stuck in a sandstorm, you get blind. You got to keep the sand out of your eyes. The evil inclination, he's always putting sand in our eyes. Always. To the point, sometimes, you got to call up the ophthalmologist. Got to go to an emergency room. Got to call, the ambulance corps to take you on a stretcher, who knows where. Always worried. I read it, I'm over 65, doesn't cost me. Insurance is going up. Got to worry, The government, they're cutting back on Social Security. The benefits are not the same. Senior citizens, got to worry. This old guy, he's 5 feet from the grave. He's worrying about Social Security. I don't even know if you're going to be there tomorrow to collect, but you're worried about Social Security. And the prescription. Then many years ago, when I lived in Baltimore, so the wife of my mashgiach, Zecher Tzaddik Livrocha, blessed memory, so there was a very good ophthalmologist. His name was Julian Goldberg. He was associated with Johns Hopkins University Medical School. There was an eye clinic called Wilmer Eye Clinic. It was the best eye clinic in the United States. And he was affiliated with that eye clinic. So my mashgiach's wife goes, and then she must have been a woman in her 50s. And the doctor himself must have been in his upper 50s. He says to her, I'll see you in 7 years. Yeah. So that night, I happened to be at the house. I was invited to eat over at my mashgiach's house Friday night. So she just repeated what happened. She says, he said, 7 years. First of all, 7 years. Who said, no, I'm going to be here in 7 years? Who said he's going to be here in 7 years? Do we know what's going to be in 7 years? You say, call back, make an appointment. 7 years. People think they're here forever. A young person can delude himself. An older person. Older doesn't mean older. You never know. Life is so fickle. But people believe you're here forever. Well, you realize we can't think about these things. No. Before who you're supposed to consider, before who you will give a reckoning. Where are you going? That's something you have to think about. Not as a holdback, but as an incentive to keep on that straight and narrow path. To have that 20/20 vision. Not to be distracted. People mix it up. Moshe Rabbeinu was the most humble person who ever walked the face of the earth. People think about humility. Now, years ago, there was a book written. I think Dershowitz wrote the book. Dershowitz is a different person today than he was at one time. It was called Chutzpah. It was people on Wall Street. How did you get ahead? Even though chutzpah, it's the Webster Dictionary, chutzpah. Some people pronounce it chutzpah. Larry had those kinds of friends that extra dose of chutzpah. Okay? But whatever it is, humble, you're meek. You think you can get ahead? It's a doggy world. You got to fight for your existence. If you believe in God, you have to do what's right because it's right and stay away from wrong because it's wrong. Right and wrong are absolutes. Either other people don't believe right and wrongs are absolutes. Once had this conversation with our friend, priest atheist. I once asked him a question. first times we were meeting, I said, do you believe in absolutes? So he said to me, he thought I was throwing him a trick question. So he was hedging for time to figure out what exactly where I'm going, because he didn't want to paint himself into a corner. So he says to me, you asked me, do I believe in absolutes? What does the word absolute mean? He was fidgeting for time. I said, I'm not here to in any way mislead you. I'll give you an example. Is wrong an absolute? Is falsehood an absolute? Is truth an absolute? He says, no. I believe truth is what you believe to be true, and wrong is what you believe to be wrong. There are no absolutes. That's what he said to me. So I said to him, I was there with somebody, his name was Randy Rose, who's a friend of his, once worked for him. And he was a financial genius. And I said to him, I want to ask you something. According to you, right is what you believes it to be right, and wrong is what you believe to be wrong. If I, together with Andy, decide, and we're on a desert island, we're going to eliminate, him by name, we're going to eliminate you. Because we believe that's right, and it's wrong that we should not eliminate you. So based on your understanding of right and wrong, we're doing the right thing, that we should eliminate Mr. X. He says, it's true, what you're saying is true. But according to my understanding what right and wrong is, you're doing the wrong thing. That was his response. And it's that everything in life, if you believe in God, is absolute. Values are absolutes. Once you believe in absolutes, then we can talk about a conscience. We can talk about where you're going before you can give a reckoning. But if there's nothing which is wrong on an absolute level, according to my understanding, I was doing the right thing. God, I disagree with you. You can only disagree with God if you don't believe in God. But if you believe in God, and it's very succinct and clear what he said is, you can't disagree, and the wrong is wrong, and the right is right. And a woman, story goes back 38 years ago, came from a very wealthy family, and her father passed away, and he was like a real estate mogul. He owned almost all the real estate on the West Side, and there was a mother and 3 sisters. And she says to me that, we go to a psychiatrist twice a week to consult exactly how to deal with the issue. I said, what do you go to a psychiatrist for? Oh, if disagreements about the real estate, and then either you go to a financial advisor or you go to a rabbi. You don't go to a psychiatrist. You people have no psychological issues. Psychiatry, what he's going to write your prescription. He may tell you to sign everything over to him. Maybe that's the solution. We're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars worth of real estate in those days. Okay, what did she do? She bought herself in those days a Jaguar. They manufactured a 16-cylinder Jaguar, 16 cylinders, not that much. Chaim, he used to, when he worked on the kibbutz, he knew how many cylinders was on the tractor. This was a 16-cylinder Jaguar. She pulls into a Manhattan garage. Listen to the story. The car is a week old. So the Hispanic garage attendant, he pulls the car into the elevator, and when he comes to the level to drive out, he left it off the ground level about 15 feet. Here, he pulls off. He's in the Jaguar, hits the ground, destroys the car. It's a week old, 16-cylinder Jaguar. She's trying to figure out why did it happen. Maybe you should put your eggs in a better basket than a 16-cylinder Jaguar. Then she gets married. She gets engaged to an Israeli. She knew the guy 3 months, and she felt close to me. So she brings him to me to meet her future fiance. So I said, she says, what do you think? I said, well, if you think he's the one, you should marry him. What happened? About 2 months afterwards, before they got married, but they already signed certain documents, she's not marrying him. He's suing her. So she comes to me with a complaint. If you saw what the man was, you should have told me I should have married him. Why don't you tell him? Why did you advise me to marry him? I said, I didn't tell you to marry. I said, if you want to marry him, you should marry him. Your mindset was the state You weren't open to any suggestions, any criticism, only the way you wanted to see it. She says, you wanted the truth. I was in a state of mind then. If you would have told me, this was her words, to marry the eraser on my pencil, I would have married the eraser on my pencil. Those were her words. So she says, Rabbi, you're right. I was really hoodwinked. He took me to the cleaners, and if I would have married him, he would have destroyed me. Okay? So everybody is in the state that you believe what you want to believe. But if you, in the old days, they say, if you wake up and die right, and you have a chance of seeing it right, then you cut short the mistakes you make, and you correct the wrong, and you try to do more right. The introduction to Pirkei Avos is the transmission of Torah from Sinai to present day. The one who authored the Mishnayos is Judah the Prince, Rav Yehuda Nossi. Don't you think the first section of the Mishnah, he should have given the introduction? We have 6 sections. You know what this is all about? Moshe received the Torah at Sinai, transmitted to Joshua, so on and so on. Here, we're halfway through the Talmud at Ethics of Our Fathers, Pirkei Avos, and all of a sudden he tells us, you know what it's all about? He gives us the transmission. What about prior to this moment? The answer is given, which is the answer to Chaim's question. People say, you know, you study Pirkei Avos, this tractate. These rabbis were geniuses, a sociologist, psychologist. They could have been therapists. The world would have looked different if they would have been there initially to mentor people. But you don't understand. It has nothing to do with them. Everything we study in this tractate was given at Sinai. As a Jew has to wear tefillin, that's the way a Jew has to, his perspective in every aspect of his life, humility-wise, objective-wise, how to treat your fellow human being, ethically, morally. Ethics and morals are not something which is human discovery, but it's divine, no different than anything else, any other part of Torah that's divine. So we're speaking about now what you have to consider. It's like God coming to every one of us, if we be prophets. Chaim, just to remember where you come from. You don't come from Hungary. You don't come from the kibbutz yate, scallions and pumpernickel or 7-grain bread. You don't come from there. You come from that putrid droplet of semen. And you know where you're going? You think in Herzliya where they have the army cemetery? Nah. You're going to the ground with maggots and worms. It's a rebel where it's located. And you're before who you stand. The Medina go to the Badatz in Israel, no. He's the judge. He hears the case, he evaluates the case, and he gives the verdict. That's the end of the story.